They always say betrayal comes from those closest to you, but that doesn't hit until it's your name in their mouth, your loyalty they've twisted, your silence they've taken as weakness. And what's worse, you never saw it coming. The betrayal didn't arrive with a knife. It arrived with a smile. The truth is, betrayal rarely comes from enemies. It comes from the ones you've supported, trusted, and even defended when no one else would. And when it hits, it doesn't just break your heart, it shatters something deeper. Your view of people, your instinct to trust, your entire relationship with reality starts to blur. Nietzsche understood this pain, but he didn't stop there. He went further. He asked, why do they do it? What makes someone betray a person they once loved or at least claimed to? And that's the part no one talks about. We think betrayal is random, that some people are just cruel. But Nietzsche didn't see it that way. He believed betrayal was often rooted in insecurity and resentment, not evil. That people betray you when your strength silently exposes their weakness, when your growth makes them feel stuck, when your peace makes them realize how much chaos they've let rule their lives. And the moment you no longer need them, that's when they feel the urge to destroy you most. Not because you did something wrong, but because by standing tall, you reminded them that they're still crawling. So no, it's not about you. It's about what you reflect. And the irony, the more loyal you are, the more dangerous you become in their eyes. Because now they know they'll never have power over you again. Most people don't betray you because of who you are. They betray you because of what being near you forces them to confront about themselves. See, your presence alone can become a mirror, not the kind that flatters, but the kind that reflects everything they've been avoiding. When you grow, evolve, become calmer, wiser, more self-contained, it highlights just how much they haven't. You stop seeking validation. You stop playing their emotional games. You begin to embody the very freedom they can't seem to grasp. And that right there is when the shift happens. They don't feel connected to you anymore. They feel threatened, and betrayal becomes a form of self-preservation for them. It's not logical. It's primal, a kind of emotional survival mechanism. They see your detachment as a sign you're above them. They start thinking, if I can't rise to their level, I'll drag them back to mine. And that's when betrayal creeps in. Not always loud and violent, sometimes quiet and subtle. Distance, shade, sabotage disguised as advice. But let's get something straight. You didn't provoke it by being better. You exposed the gap, the psychological gap between who they are and who they pretend to be. And that discomfort doesn't sit quietly. Nietzsche wrote about this in different terms. He saw the will to power not just as dominance, but as the deep drive to assert identity. When someone lacks a strong identity, they don't build, it's easier to destroy. And betrayal becomes their twisted form of power. They couldn't stand beside you, so they chose to stand against you. And when it happens, you start doubting yourself. Was I too cold? Too intense? Too distant? No. The truth is, they saw you pulling away. Not from them, but from who they needed you to be in order to feel secure. So betrayal in this context becomes not just an act, it becomes a cry, a final attempt to force your world to shrink back into theirs. There's something they'll never say out loud, something most people can't even admit to themselves. They didn't betray you because you were wrong. They betrayed you because you were right. When you live with clarity, when you speak with honesty, when you act with integrity, it creates tension in people who survive by pretending. Your presence makes their excuses harder to believe. And that's unbearable to someone who's built their identity around those very excuses. So instead of confronting their lies, they rewrite the story. You become too intense, too distant, too much. Not because you were, but because that's the only way they can justify what they're about to do to you. And here's the twist. Betrayal isn't just about what they do, it's about when they do it. They wait until you're no longer useful, until you no longer fit their version of the script. When you start asking different questions, when you stop tolerating their cycles, that's when the betrayal unfolds. But most people miss the deeper layer. Betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It never does. It comes from those who had the most access to you, the ones you let closest. And that's what makes it sting. They weren't just in your life. They were in your trust. And once that's broken, it shifts the way you relate to everything. And still, the mind goes searching. Was it something I said? Was I too cold? Should I have done more? But none of that matters because the truth is, it was never about your actions. It was about your evolution. You outgrew the version of you that tolerated being misunderstood. And that scared them because your growth highlighted their stagnation. And instead of rising with you, they turned on you. Psychologically, this comes from something called status collapse. When people sense a shift in perceived status, especially when they feel like they're falling behind, they lash out. It's not jealousy in the usual sense. It's grief. Grief over the version of you that made them feel okay. Grief that you're no longer emotionally available in the way they liked. And so they betray, not because they hate you, but because they can't reach you anymore. And rather than deal with the silence, they make noise. And once you see that, everything clicks. It wasn't a personal attack. It was personal insecurity projected outward. There's something few people recognize in the moment of betrayal. It's not just a break in trust. It's a revelation. It's a mirror that shows you who someone really is when loyalty is no longer convenient. And that's when their true nature slips through the cracks. We tend to believe betrayal is always dramatic, a backstab, a loud exit. But in reality, it's subtle. It's quiet. It creeps in through delayed replies, changed tones, small promises forgotten, and unspoken resentments that slowly stack up. And the worst part, you usually feel it long before you see it. Your body picks up on the shift. The conversations feel more transactional. The energy doesn't feel the same. And when you speak, it feels like they're only half listening, because they are. Here's what most won't admit. Betrayal doesn't happen in one moment. It happens in stages. First, they disconnect from you emotionally. Then they rationalize the distance. Then they build an internal case against you. And by the time they betray you, they've already convinced themselves that you deserve it. And if you've ever felt blindsided by someone, here's the truth. It wasn't sudden. You just wanted so badly to believe they were who you hoped they were that you missed all the signs they were becoming someone else. That's not your failure. That's your compassion. But that compassion, when unguarded, becomes the crack they walk through. This is why Nietzsche once wrote that people don't want the truth. What they want is reassurance that their illusions are valid. And if you stop feeding that illusion, you instantly become a threat. The moment you step out of the role they assigned you, the agreeable friend, the forgiving partner, the reliable fallback, you break their illusion of control. That's when you'll start seeing their true face. They'll call it betrayal on your end. They'll say you changed. But the reality is, they betrayed the moment they needed you to be small so they could feel safe. Think about that. They didn't betray because they were pushed away. They betrayed because you stood in your power. You stopped shrinking. You stopped playing a role that made them feel better about their own limitations. And when someone's self-worth is built on your silence, your boundaries sound like attacks. Your growth feels like abandonment. Your strength feels like rejection. This is why betrayal hurts so much. It doesn't just end a relationship. It reveals that some people only love the version of you they could use. What happens after betrayal is just as important as the betrayal itself. Because here's what most people don't expect. It doesn't just change how you see them. It changes how you see yourself. You start questioning everything. Not just what they did, but why you allowed it for so long. Why you overlooked the warning signs. Why you explained away the weird gut feelings. Why you gave someone so much of your time, energy, loyalty without stopping to ask if they had the depth to hold it. But here's where the growth lives. Betrayal doesn't mean you were naive. It means you loved with an open hand. You believed in people because you wanted to see their best. You hoped that if you showed up real and loyal, they'd meet you there. And that's not weakness. That's courage. Because in a world built on performance, being real is revolutionary. But realness comes with risk, and betrayal is part of that risk. Nietzsche wrote that the snake which cannot cast its skin has to die. He wasn't talking about reptiles. He was talking about us humans. If we don't shed what no longer serves us, whether it's beliefs, patterns, or people, we slowly die on the inside. So as painful as betrayal is, it becomes the force that wakes you up. It peels away your illusions, your blind loyalty, your people-pleasing habits. And what's left behind isn't bitterness, it's clarity. You begin to move differently, not colder, just quieter, more discerning. You don't give everyone access anymore. Not because you're afraid, but because you finally understand that not everyone deserves it. This is the point where the healing begins. Not when you forgive them, but when you forgive yourself. For staying too long, for giving too much, for not listening to your own soul when it whispered, something's off. You see, betrayal doesn't just close a chapter, it rewrites your entire standard for who you let in. And while it might feel like a loss, what you gain is priceless. Self-trust, a sharper eye, a quieter heart, a deeper connection with yourself. And eventually, the pain fades. But the lesson stays etched into your nervous system like a scar with wisdom. And you carry it, not as weight, but as armor. Not to keep everyone out, but to make sure that next time you only let in those who can actually meet you where you are. The strange thing is, betrayal doesn't just end something. It activates something. Something fierce. Something focused. Something that says, never again. You begin to rebuild, but this time you do it differently. Not out of fear, not out of bitterness, but from a place of inner clarity that can only come after you've seen the truth, raw, unfiltered, and painful. You learn how to protect your peace without becoming hard. You learn how to say no without guilt. You stop over-explaining. You stop chasing closure from people who were never capable of giving you honesty in the first place. Because here's the most painful truth of all. Some people only treat you with respect when they feel they can't get to you anymore. It's the distance that wakes them up, not the kindness. It's the silence that echoes, not the words you beg them to hear. And by the time they finally realize what they lost, you're already gone. Not out of spite, but because betrayal changed the lock on your door. And the old key doesn't fit anymore. That's what Nietzsche meant when he spoke about transformation through suffering. He didn't glorify pain. He understood that it breaks the old version of you, the one that tolerated too much, believed too quickly, and stayed too long. It destroys the illusion. And in that destruction, it builds something stronger. You don't become colder. You become warmer with yourself. You don't shut down. You just stop being available to those who treat your presence like it's disposable. And here's what no one talks about. Eventually, you stop waiting for the apology that will never come. You stop needing them to explain why they did what they did. You stop looking back, because healing doesn't mean forgetting. Healing means you remember differently. You remember from a place of power, not pain, from a place of wisdom, not wounds. And when that happens, you smile. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it no longer controls you. So here you are, not broken, not bitter, just aware, more grounded, less available. Not in a cold way, but in a clean way. You're not carrying the weight of betrayal like a wound anymore. You're carrying it like wisdom. That's the difference most never reach. They stay stuck in the story, replaying the scenes, trying to rewrite the ending. But not you. You learn to walk out of that chapter without needing applause or revenge, just peace. And peace is louder than closure. There's something sacred about healing quietly, about not needing to broadcast your growth, about letting people believe what they want while you live in alignment. Because at some point, you stop explaining, you stop convincing, you stop inviting people to understand your side of the story, because you realize the people who get it never needed the explanation, and the ones who demand it were never really listening to begin with. That's what betrayal teaches you in its own brutal way, not to guard your heart, but to be more intentional with who you open it to, not to become cold, but to stay warm in the right places. It gives you an edge, not sharp enough to cut others, but sharp enough to carve out a better version of yourself. One that doesn't entertain disrespect, one that doesn't beg to be chosen, one that doesn't confuse being needed with being loved. You start seeing things clearly. You learn that losing people who never respected you isn't a loss, it's a return to yourself. And in that return, there's no drama, no performance, just alignment, just presence, just you finally becoming who you were before the world taught you to shrink. If that hit home, drop a comment. Say something you've learned or something you've let go of, not just for you, but for someone else who's reading and healing too. And if you're on this path with me, subscribe. This isn't noise, it's real growth, and you're right on time.